guys, this is Svetlana from Cosplay, and today I wanted to show you how to create this super cute demon skull mask out of simple EVA foam, foam clay, and also with one of my favorite crafting tools, the Dremel. This is actually my second video sponsored by the company Dremel, and in the very first one I actually showed you how to create cool textures and special effects, and also how to turn simple EVA foam into materials like wood, hammered steel, or even dragon skin, and I think that's pretty awesome. So today I also wanted to show you how to apply all these techniques to an actual project and create something with that, and also how to handle your Dremel. At this point, thanks so much to Dremel for sponsoring our channel, and well, now let's start crafting. For this project, I threw together two of the costume patterns from our store. I decided to use these cute ram horns and this demon skull mask and then combine them. We actually offer all kinds of armor pieces, accessories, and weapon blueprints that you can simply download and print out at home. So first I opened the instructions for the mask and printed them out over several pages. To put the pages together, I simply cut off one side and then taped them together along the edges. Now I had to cut out all pattern pieces individually. As you can see, there are quite a few parts to this puzzle. The skull mask is one of the more advanced patterns in our store, but also super fun to make. Also, don't forget to cut out the little registration marks here. For this I always use a small pattern notcher. So here are all the pieces. It actually helps a lot to look at the overview page so you don't get lost. Now my material of choice was 5mm thick low density EVA foam. It's quite flexible, squishy, and easy to work with. I traced all pieces onto the foam sheet with a pen, drew on the markings as well, and then turned them around to mirror them for the other side. I did this with all the puzzle elements and then afterwards began to cut out everything. While most edges just require a normal straight cut with the box cutter, some actually need to be cut at an angle. You will find indicators for that on the pattern. An arrow towards the inside of the shape means you also need to cut tilted towards the inside. Here were no markings, so I just kept on cutting straight along this edge. Yeah, and this is basically how all of our patterns work. To get around tighter corners, you can also use a smaller knife, of course. And then, I just worked my way through this foam puzzle and cut everything out. Once done, it was time to glue all parts together. The adhesive I used for that is called contact cement. I simply applied it carefully onto all edges, and then, when the glue was ready, I began connecting everything. As you can see, by using different angles on the foam, they created pretty cool shapes now. I slowly built up the face of the skull and just kept on connecting piece after piece following my puzzle plan. And yes, this step surely requires some patience, but once you start seeing it coming together, it's super exciting. I first finished both sides of the face as well as the jaw, and then applied some final glue along the middle seam. Well, and once I connected these both sides, the skull mask was finally done. Already looked quite spooky, don't you think? Now on to the next part, the ram horns. Here everything worked pretty much the same way, but easier. I printed out the patterns, glued all pages together, cut them out, and trace their shapes onto 5mm EVA foam. The patterns here were far less complicated and only 3 parts were required to make a horn, as you can see. Once you cut them all out though, you'll notice that they are still a little bit tricky to put together. So after I applied contact cement to all edges, I began connecting all elements. And here is the tricky part. You actually need to squeeze and pull the material so the registration marks are properly aligned. See, here are 2 different lengths. So just pull and squeeze until everything fits. The horns are very curved and this is necessary to bring them properly into shape. I know it sounds tricky, but I'm sure you can do it as well. Just closing the very last seam is a little bit annoying. I tried to press both edges together as best as I could, but my result also didn't turn out perfect. The seams are still a little bit bumpy, but we can easily fix this. For that, I simply grabbed my Dremel 4000 with the flexible shaft and a sanding band attachment. Especially the inner seam turned out messy, but this tip is just perfect to smooth it out super fast. Just work with a high speed setting and be careful not to sand away too much material. I used my Dremel here on all the seams of the horns, but also to clean up a few on my skull mask. This way the glue lines became way less obvious and it would be a lot easier to hide them later. Next, I wanted to attach the horns to the mask. As you can see though, this would result in a huge hole at the back. So I quickly cut out some additional material, added a bit of contact cement and glued it onto the mask. I marked how much material I would actually need and then got rid of the rest with my box cutter. Easy! So far so good. Now for the next step, I wanted to add some texture. Skulls and horns are not perfectly smooth, but actually full of holes, lines and imperfections. To find good references and inspiration, I actually did a Google image search for ram horns first. When I felt confident enough, I grabbed the next material I needed, foam clay. This air-drying lightweight clay works perfectly in combination with EVA foam. I just had to apply some water with a brush first, so the material would stick better to my foam horns. Then I added a little bit of clay to the end and spread it out with my fingers. Next, I rolled a small sausage between my hands and applied it carefully all around the horn tip. The lower side then got flattened out at the bottom, so it looked like it grew naturally. The upper part, however, got a hard edge. I thought this style looked pretty good. Getting used to foam clay needs a bit of practice, but I would say it's still a very beginner-friendly material. I constantly worked with more water to smooth out the surface and to keep the foam clay sticky. Afterwards, I added more sausages, every time a bit larger, and then smoothed them out the same way. Well, and this is how I worked myself along the ram horns until I was done. Just sausage after sausage. Done! I didn't glue on the horns onto the skull just yet, however. Instead, I wanted to do some sculpting work on the skull first, and this way the horns wouldn't get in the way. For this step, I attached it to one of my styrofoam wig heads. I just used some duct tape to hold it in place. Then I added water as usual onto the foam, grabbed some clay, and began spreading it all over the mask. I first sculpted some raised areas around the eyes and eyebrows since I thought it looked more spooky this way. Then I started adding some thick scales around this area as well. This was totally freestyle and I didn't have a reference or anything, but I liked the idea and kept on experimenting. Foam clay isn't the best material if you want to work super precise, but it's perfect to get a good base shape. I also made a few tiny teeth with it and grabbed one when it was dry. Then I attached this grinding stone tip onto my Dremel Stylo Plus. This machine is super small and it allows me to work very precise. So I sat down and began carving in some scratches and marks onto the surface. With this simple step, my foam pieces turned into cute monster teeth. Once done with all of them, I simply squeezed one after the other into the wet foam clay of the mask. Cute, right? After I was satisfied, I kept on sculpting on some more demon scales. To keep the transition smooth, I always spread out the bottom evenly. So far, so good. What do you think? I personally like the style and think the mask looked already quite cute. With so much sculpting work, it was clearly a good idea to keep the mask and horns separated until this point. But now it was finally time to add some contact cement onto the horns and onto the mask. And afterwards, carefully attach them and boom, beautiful! Now to quickly hide the seams, I added, you guessed it right, a lot of more foam clay. I squeezed on some big sausage, nice and even, and then finished the demon scales in this area as well. This looked already much better. Now I only had to add a few last elements. As I mentioned, I like the scales, so I just added more of them all over the face. I was honestly not sure if this was already too much, but I just hoped it would look good at the end. Well, and now the sculpting part was finally done. As you can see, the clay was already dry on the surface. However, foam clay needs a lot of time to cure all the way through. So I just put the mask on the side for a few days just to make sure. And then the moment has come to sand in some texture. For my main sanding work, I'm actually using the Dremel 4000 here with a flexible shaft attachment, and as you can see, it's hanging like on this handy tool holder. And yeah, with the flexible shaft attachment, I'm actually able to use my Dremel like a pen. So it's like super comfy in my hands, and especially since it's also not so heavy, and like I also don't have so much strength in my hand. I can like reach every single tiny area and everything and just work much more comfortable. And you know, if you have like big hands and more strength in your hands, unlike me, you can also use the Dremel 8220, which is also just as powerful as the Dremel 4000, by the way. But it's wireless, as you can see, because it has like this LiPo battery. You also get like in addition LiPo battery to recharge, so you always have full LiPo battery to work with your Dremel. But like for me personally, it's a little bit too heavy. So this is the reason why I'm working with the flexible shaft attachment and the Dremel 4000 instead. So I grabbed my Dremel again, this time with the polishing cone tip. It's obviously designed for a different application, but it's also pretty awesome to smooth out the transitions between foam clay layers. I used it here mainly to hide some of the more visible seams. Then I switched to this orange grinding stone attachment. This one was great to create deep growing marks on the horn layers. I worked here super rough on the highest speed setting and sanded in white lines all around. As you can see, I only used the edge of the grinding stone. Plus, I also checked out my ram horn reference for guidance. As always, make sure to wear a respiratory protection if you do this. Foam dust is super nasty. Also, this step took a little while, but crafting always requires some patience. Once done, I cleaned up the area with my vacuum hose. This way I got rid of most of the foam dust. So far so good, but this was just the beginning. Next, I grabbed the Dremel Stylo Plus with the tiny grinding stone attachment from before. This one was just perfect to add similar but much finer growing lines. Using this handy tool, I added more thin carvings all around both horns. As you can see, this machine is really small and lightweight, and it was actually quite comfy to work with it even for hours. Well, and this is how the first horn looked like. Now I only had to repeat all this work on the other side as well. While I was working on my table, Midna was patiently waiting for some belly rubs. As you can see, I skipped a little bit of carving here, but this is basically what I wanted to add to the whole demon mask. I could obviously leave it plain here, but I always like to add some fancy extras to my costume pieces. Again, I used the Stylo Plus for this job. While I could have used another Dremel here as well, I personally just wanted to challenge myself and see how fine my work could turn out. Everything here was also freestyle, and I really enjoyed crafting without any boundaries. The sculpted on scales gave me also some inspiration, and I basically just followed their shapes. I finished scale after scale and worked my way all over the whole mask. I really fell in love with the little Dremel during this project. So this part was done. However, I still wanted to add much more. For the next step, I switched to a small round grinding stone attachment. With this, I carved a lot of little craters into the foam clay. I really tried to highlight the deeper areas around the upper lip and randomly added more dots here and there. To be honest, I really didn't know what I was doing here, but it felt right to add a little bit around the nose and also over the brows. You know, it's art. Next, I switched back to my flexible shaft attachment again and began carving in small but also quite deep tears into the horn layers. I wanted to add more texture all over the place, and these marks felt natural to me. I worked all around both horns and a bit on the mask itself, and always tried to make it look random. Finally, I went back to my sanding band. This is actually my favorite part, and I really loved doing it. Adding a huge, massive scar through the eye area. I first began slow and then went deeper and deeper with the sanding drum. As you can see, the scar even reached the horn. Super cool. Well, and that was it. I was finally done with the sanding work. This was a lot of effort, but I absolutely loved the texture. As you see so far, I'm working a lot with the Stylo Plus. And to be honest with you, when I got this tool, I wasn't really sure about that since it's very small, it's not very powerful, it's like to me. But when I was using it for several hours and did like all the tiny details, I actually noticed how amazing it is since I was able to finish all the details in one single sitting. And I was doing this like for hours. And you know, I usually do this with the flexible attachment shaft, And then I have to do several breaks because my hand is shaking from the vibration. And with the Stylo Plus, it was just so much more comfortable to work with. So I think the 4000 and the Stylo Plus are a great team together, like the 4000 with the flexible shaft attachment for heavy duty stuff and the Stylo Plus for small little details. And if you prefer to work wireless, you also might want to get a Dremel LITE for the small stuff, and also the very heavy duty Dremel 8220 for the, bigger stuff. If you want more info about all the Dremel products, just check out dremel.com. They have a huge variety of tools, attachments and accessories. In addition, Dremel now even runs a cosplay section full of inspiring tutorials, tips and tricks. But now back to work. I had to clean the surface with my vacuum first. It's really important to get rid of all the foam particles. I even used the airbrush to blow away the remaining sanding dust. Then I grabbed some quick seal, put a bit onto my finger and spread it over the duct tape areas to smooth out the edges here. I used tap water to smear everything nice and even. Next, for priming the surface, I wanted to use Flex Bond first. This product can be applied with a simple brush. I didn't use a lot of Flex Bond here, just one layer in fact, since I only wanted to smooth out the surface a bit and seal in the holes and gaps. I primed both horns and then finished the whole face afterwards. Once everything was dry, the surface was already much smoother. Plus, it was now 100% foam dust free. For the next step, I used Gummi Dip, which is basically the German equivalent of Plasti Dip. I heated up the can in warm water first, shook it properly, and then sprayed it evenly all over the mask. I applied 2 thin layers here and made sure the inside of the mask would not get touched to avoid any reactions with my skin. Well, and this was the result. As you can see, everything was now super smooth and shiny, but the dremeled in textures and details were still perfectly visible. The Flex Bond and Gummi Dip combination did a great job here. Now for the painting, I chose these 2 Vallejo colors as my base. I filled the brighter one into my airbrush first and began covering the whole mask with it. As you might already guess, this paint needed a few layers until it was really covering. Using the airbrush, however, I was able to reach all areas pretty quickly and also paint the deeper sanded in details. You can obviously do this all by hand as well, though it might take a lot longer. Well, and this was the result once I was done. Next, I tried to add some shading and darker areas onto the mask. I have to say that this was the first time I did all the details myself with the airbrush, and I was super nervous. My hands are always shaking and the airbrush isn't an easy tool to master. So I began doing some rough areas along the horns and tried to keep on working finer and finer. I messed up a lot here, but luckily it wasn't visible at the end. And I think the difference looked already quite nice. The most important part when trying a new tool is not to be scared to mess something up. Yes, it will happen, but it will help you to learn from your mistakes and get better next time. I personally was really proud that I was able to do this step all by myself without Benny's help. Next, I grabbed some satin spray varnish and applied a thick protective layer onto my paint job. This was just the preparation for the next and most important part, however, oil paint washing. For this technique, the surface needs to be completely sealed and protected. It actually works with acrylics as well, but oil colors take far longer to dry and are easier to control. So I grabbed some brown, some black, and also got my brush cleaner ready. Afterwards, I mixed up some paint, added a bit of cleaner, and began applying the color all over the first horn. I used the cleaner here as a thinner and made sure to reach even the deepest carved-in details on the foam. Afterwards, I used tissue paper soaked with more cleaner and wiped most of the paint away again. What this does is keep the oil paint only inside the scratches and holes. The result looked already quite nice, so I kept repeating this step all over the right horn. The difference is remarkable, don't you think? It's a super simple and fast technique, but it's great to highlight details and make the bone texture far more believable. Now I only had to finish the rest of the demon face. I kept on using the brush cleaner as a thinner, so the paint was much more easier to rub off afterwards. Here I just covered the whole area and made sure I didn't clean too much. I also should mention that wearing gloves would have been a good idea here. To be honest though, I was so excited that I just forgot that. The oil washing technique is really messy, but also incredibly fun. I totally enjoyed seeing the demon face come to life at this point. As you can see, the Dremeled in carvings really popped now, and this technique was just perfect to make them properly visible. Once done, I let everything dry overnight, and this was the result. It looked so nice. I absolutely loved it. However, I was not 100% done just yet. I grabbed a small brush and applied additional paint to the edges of the horn layers and especially the massive scar around the eye. I just wanted to add a bit more shadow here. Well, and then, after I was satisfied, I applied a last layer of matte spray varnish. The result looked like real bone, just as planned. As you can see, the inside was still free of primer and paint to avoid any allergic reactions. To attach the mask, I then used some simple shoelaces, cut them to the right length, and attach them to the inside with a lot of hot glue. Then I tied them together and tada! My super cute demon mask ram horn combination was done. It looked so cute, don't you think so? And I only worked a few days on it. Even Minna likes it and now runs around and scares all of our neighbors.
I really hope this video was helpful and especially inspirational. And you know, like this mask here was totally freestyle, but you can find so many more patterns on our website. Like, for example, on comiccosplay.com we have different hats, we have horns, we have creature sculpts, we have also like bracers, shoulder armors, breastplates, also weapons, like all the things you need. And if you still need any help to create something awesome, we also have cosplay crafting books. Like, for example, this shows you how to turn simple EVA foam into awesome armor. And this shows you also how to turn simple EVA foam into really cool weapons. So, if you need some help, check out comiccosplay.com and create something truly epic. I also hope that I was able to show you that Dremel is a really cool tool, no matter if you get a small one or a big one, or like all of them. And you know, so I hope I was able to show you a Dremel that fits to your own crafting style, so you can choose your favorite tool as well. And as always, you will find a link for all tools and materials we used in this video in the video description down below, so check that out. And if you also still have any questions, just leave us a comment under the video. And also, you can also support us with the YouTube algorithm in case you have no questions, just by writing down Corgi and join the Corgi squad. And as always, like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. Consider to support us on Patreon. Thanks so much to our Patreons at this point. Happy crafting and see you very soon.